Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bob Stovall, Government Affairs Chair for the Royal Gorge Chamber Alliance, and we, along with the Fremont County Commissioners, are happy to host our first I think this has been the first legislative hour for a couple of years since COVID and stuff. We're happy to get that back again. This is being broadcast, and we have the crack Fremont County technology team hiding in the booth in the form of Commissioner Kevin Grantham. So we're making our representatives sit up at the desk because Kevin doesn't know how to work the cameras. So we're happy to have you here. Thank you both for coming. And as I discussed with them briefly, what I'm going to introduce is introduce them one at a time. Let them make some comments about the bills they are carrying, plus any other bills they think are important. And so we'll let them speak first, and then we will proceed with questions. Representative Luck has to leave a little bit early for another. That's the life of a legislator, isn't it? You know, one thing to another. But I'm going to start out with the introductions, and I don't want to make it any more complicated than it is. I'm introducing Senator Mark Baisley. He is in his first term as a senator. Now, as you all know, we had redistricting, so we have got a different shape of district. You know, when you print this stuff off the website into a PDF, it comes out in 4-point type. So, Senator, I know you're Fremont, Chaffee, Custer, Park, Teller, and Jefferson. Is that correct?
And yes, sir. And the rural parts of Douglas.
Okay, rural parts of Douglas. So you've got a fairly sizable area you represent, as is the nature of rural districts in Colorado. And notice here you're carrying a number of bills. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about those and tell us about the other issues that you're concerned with at the Capitol.
Sure. So thanks everybody for being here. It's great to visit with you. This is like the center of gravity for Senate District 4 for me is Fremont County. So I'm always thrilled to come join you all. And got good friends here. Let me just address a little bit kind of the nature, the tenor of what's going on at the Capitol, and then I'll dive into the bills. With redistricting, that affected a decision for moving over to the Senate chamber from several of us in the House. I think there's something like 8 people that went, both parties that moved from serving in the House of Representatives to serving in the Senate. So I've served for the past 4 years in the House. Last 2 years that I had the pleasure of serving with Representative Luck and sat right in front of her, and so I could cheat off her paper. It was great. But so now over in the Senate for the first time, there are a lot of new people, and I'll leave that up to Representative Luck to talk about the House, but it's something like 2/3 or something like that of the House are new people. And quite a few new in the Senate, but a lot more that are new to the Senate that have served in the House for a number of years first. So that's different. The 2 big things I wanted to convey in how it feels there and what we're seeing in developing, one is, remember that high school question your teacher would ask? Say, if you knew that you would not fail, what would you do? And that's kind of how the new idealistic new Democrat representatives are coming in saying, if I knew my bill would not fail, what would I do? So they're pretty idealistic, lofty bills, and most of which bother me and Representative Luck quite a bit. So, and I'm getting a lot of head nods. So if you knew you could get rid of all guns, would you do that? So there will be attempts like that coming through. So we're seeing some things that were scratching my head, just like this. And then the other factor is our governor. So the governor is certainly not as left-wing as many of the folks in the legislature, but he does have aspirations. The unspoken secret, or the open secret, really, in the Capitol is that he would love to be the first gay president. That's kind of a goal of his, is to be president. So, depending upon what happens in Washington over the next couple of years, we might see him throw his hat in the ring this year. It's very possible. So because of that, that's kind of a backstop for us for the real crazy. So when the really radical stuff comes in, we will see the governor, I believe, try to stop those bills from even reaching his desk. So we've seen that in the past, where something that he does not want to go on record as either having vetoed or approved or signed into a law, he will call his party leadership in and say, don't let that get to my desk, and so they'll kill it in committee along the way. So, so I'm hoping that that sort of thing happens with the more radical things this year. That could be a little bit of a salvation for us for some of the more radical things. But the kind of bills that we're seeing coming through, certainly gun control bills, the most radical gun control bill, excuse me, well, tickle in the throat, is most radical bill we haven't seen introduced yet. It's being talked about. Maybe we'll never see it. I don't know. I suspect that we will, but there's probably quite a few negotiations going on that we're not privy to before it gets introduced, and we'll see if that. But so we'll see some gun control bills. Certainly, abortion was a big issue that Representative Luck led the battle against last year. Of course, with having the supermajority, they passed that and signed into law, but they're going to ride that a little bit further too. So they're calling that access. So we'll probably see bills where they try to help pay for or try to make Colorado even more of a destination state for folks from other states. Anyway, we'll see some of that. The new two areas that I'm seeing new coming in are in housing. So they're getting, the Democrat Party's getting much more involved in housing. So we'll see rent control and those kind of things. And then what's the other area? In business, I'm seeing already 3 bills that have a lot to do with micromanaging how companies run, how they treat their employees. And the craziest one that just come up, just got introduced, a Senate bill, is, and they all have one thing in common, and that's the same senator on all these bills, so she's on a tear. Anyways, it's the craziest one is has to do with hourly employees, where they're mandating predictability. So if you run a restaurant, keep an eye on this, because they will mandate that you give them their work schedule like 2 weeks in advance, and then you have to guarantee those hours. They don't have to work those hours, but you have to pay them for those hours. That's kind of the wording. So there's a lot of that kind of thing happening. Okay, so that's the landscape as I'm seeing it. Let me talk about 4 of my bills real fast. One is a repeat from last year. I was unsuccessful in getting a license plate bill passed. License plate bills are kind of the joke around the Capitol. Representative Luck always votes against the new license plate bills, so she lovingly voted against mine last year, but no, on principle there. And I didn't think I'd ever run a new license plate bill. I frankly think it's silly that we pass law to have a new license plate. I don't know why it's done that way in Colorado, but if you want the pollinators, I'm not sure who all have a specialized license plate. There's over 100 of them that the poor county commissioners or county clerks, excuse me, have to manage. So this is an In God We Trust. So this is a veteran who always had an In God We Trust license plate when he lived in other states, moved to Colorado a few years ago, and approached me and said, can't we have an In God We Trust license plate? That was the first time I thought, oh, okay, maybe I will run a license plate bill. So ran it last year. It actually passed pretty overwhelmingly in the House, in spite of Stephanie Luck. But it was introduced intentionally on the very last day of the session so that it would die in the calendar, because it takes a couple of days at least for a bill to pass through both chambers, the House and the Senate. So the person who had control over when that bill would get introduced on the House floor, she made sure it got in last day so that it could not make it through. So it didn't make it. Anyway, so that's a minor bill of mine, but it's on the way, and I think Representative Luck will have another opportunity to vote against it in a couple of weeks, and but I think it will go through. There are 3 bills that were brought to me by county commissioners, and which I really appreciate. And one is has to do with, and I don't understand this extremely well. Commissioner Grantham could tell you all about it, I'm certain, but it has to do with property valuations are going. The property valuations, property taxes are determined at a particular date across the state of when we value the properties, and it happened to be at a real peak moment. So everyone's property values are as high as they've ever been. Our taxes, property taxes, are bound to be extremely high, and county commissioners and assessors, treasurers probably are a thing. How do we kind of dampen that so that the shock doesn't hit our citizens, our residents, too highly, too strongly? So a lot of commissioners, counties have been holding back on some mill levies, some mill charges, and they, without asking anyone's permission. It's been a little tenuous. They're not so sure that it's a legal thing for them to do, specifically since Taxpayers' Bill of Rights requires that we get the citizens' permission to raise taxes. So if they pull back a tax for a year or two and then re-implement it, did that require a whole new vote? Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Oh, God bless you, sir. Appreciate that, Commissioner. So, so this bill will give them cover. That's the idea, that they would be able to have a vacation for some mill levies to try to lessen the impact over the next year or two. So that's one. Also, when you go to renew your automobile, your registration, as of the 1st of January, based on a bill that passed last year, I believe it was last year, you will have to opt out of a statewide state park annual pass, which is, I was like $30. I don't recall what that is, but somewhere around there. It's $29, yeah. So you automatically are signed up for that annual pass. Well, what that is intended to do, 2 things. The governor wants to raise tens of millions of dollars that I think he's going to spend on parks. I hope he's going to spend it appropriately. It'll also increase the traffic to those state parks. So county commissioners who concern themselves with the roads, the access to those parks, are saying, wow, it's already tough enough to get funding to maintain those roads, those access roads. We would like a slice of that money that's going to be raised, that's going to create this additional traffic. And so that's one of my bills, is to say, of those monies raised, of those funds raised, let's skim off the top, actually off the bottom, because there's a minimum, I believe it's $29 million that the governor is planning on having. And so once it reaches his goal beyond that, then we'd like to have funds come out of that source in order to pay for the maintenance of those access roads. I've been told a couple of times that he will veto that bill. He doesn't want us skimming out of his new pot of cash, so we'll find out. My favorite bill this year was also brought to me by a county commissioner from Park County, Amy Mitchell, who had been friends with for quite some time. And this has everything to do with Colorado, and I'll tell you why. I think you'll relate to it and love it as I do. So there are, as it turns out, and should be to no one's surprise, some property owners who own massive amounts of land, like tens of thousands of acres of land. There's even at least one 14,000-foot peak that is owned privately by a guy named John Rubin. So, you know, it's a thing, of course, in Colorado. I think there's 56 peaks or something like that are 14,000 feet and higher. And so it's a thing to go climb all those, unless the 14ers, and they even have a club called the 14ers. Well, to get to a lot of those peaks, it's best to cross private property that's owned by some of these large landowners. And those large landowners for decades have been very gracious in saying, come on over on my property. Cross my property to get to the peaks, to get to the Arkansas, to go fly fishing, to get to campgrounds, to ride your mountain bikes. And it's been working out great this has not been an issue. As far back as I could research, the statute that tries to give them some protection for liability, because their thinking is, come on across my property and enjoy Colorado, just don't sue me if you break your leg. So there's been limited liability in statutes since about 1969. So when something gets challenged like that, they pay attention. And these are people of means, so they have attorneys that watch. And what had happened about 20 months ago, there was someone who wandered intentionally onto the United States Air Force Academy property on his mountain bike, riding on the trail. And as he's enjoying the view, looking up instead of watching the trail ahead of him, poor guy drifted off and fell into about a 20-foot sinkhole, a big fall, and got very hurt. He had brain damage. It was quite a fall. He sues the Air Force Academy. And so the property owner's attorney, so all these massive property owners use this one guy, Patrick Shilkin, who himself is a property owner, a large property owner in Park County. And they paid close attention to this trial, and the plaintiff won and was awarded $7.3 million. So that happened just this past May, I believe it was. So what do you think the property owners did? They said, well, then no one's coming across my property anymore. This not only kind of makes it not as fun to live in Colorado, but it really affects tourism. You know, some of the real basic characteristics of this state. They want people to have access. They want people to enjoy, but they don't want to pay for when someone wanders off into an old mine and so on. So that's always a concern of theirs. So all that to say, that bill of mine will tighten the chinks in the armor for that existing statute that allowed for that successful lawsuit. I've got the 14ers, the mountain bikers, and so on. A lot of organizations, the Colorado Farm Bureau, cattlemen's, even Denver Water, folks that have a lot of property and allow that access. A lot of organizations are hoping that this is a successful bill passed into law, and I have one opposition. Can y'all guess who the opposition would be? Stephanie. That's right. Very good, Mr. Chairman. No, it's not Stephanie Luck. It's
Senator, I think what I'd like to do at this point, if you don't mind,
Yes, sir.
is we'll go ahead and let Representative Luck introduce herself. Okay. You've got some great bills. I mean, I'm sitting there looking at this and saying, yeah, I know all about those. Those are wonderful.
I'm done. Trial lawyers, that's the answer to the question.
The one thing I will say is we have some cards up here. I'm going to ask Emily Tracy and Roseanne Gain to pass them out. We have some pens, just to keep order, and because we often get a lot of duplicate questions, we're going to ask you to put your questions on a card, and then we'll sort of pull them together, similar questions, and ask them together. Now, Representative Stephanie Luck is also representing we used to have 2 representatives with Fremont County. We now only have 1, but it's a good one, so we're good. She represents Chaffee, Custer, Fremont, parts of Pueblo, and Teller, right? Am I correct? And you're in your 2nd term, as I recall. And my goodness, you've got a limit of 5 bills, and you've only introduced 3, according to the website. Is that correct?
So far, yes.
So far, yeah, okay. Well, Representative Luck, why don't you tell us what's going on your side besides voting against Senator Baisley's bills?
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. Many of you I know very well, and it's good to be home in Fremont County. So I want to also give a broad overview of some things, many things that I talk about every time I speak, just so that people have an understanding of how our state government works. So we are a citizen legislature, and we only meet 120 days every year unless we are called into a special session. Those 120 days are not business days. They are 120 consecutive days or calendar days. They include weekends. And so today we are on number 27. So when we head in on Monday, we will be almost a fourth of the way through the legislative session this year, which I'm excited about. So far, we have seen 171 bills introduced in the House, 111 bills introduced in the Senate for a total of 282 bills. Now, as was mentioned by Bob, we each are entitled to introduce 5 bills, and there are 100 of us. So we can anticipate that there are still about 300 or better bills to be introduced this session. Now, what's interesting about that is the deadlines for introducing of bills have by and large passed. And so now if you're introducing a bill, you had to either ask for a late bill, or in my case, I will be introducing a resolution, and the deadline for that is further on in the session. We are likely to see upwards of 600, if not 700 bills this year. So do the math. That calculates down to 8 to 10 bills every day that we're looking at and examining. Some of those bills are one-page bills. Some of those bills are hundreds of pages long. Some of them create whole new departments. All of them, however, have the opportunity or the ability to change the way that we live. And so each one has to be vetted. And part of the vetting process depends upon you all. It's the committee hearing time. And so if there are bills that you are seeing coming through, you can check out the legislative website, leg.colorado.gov, and there are what we call status sheets, and you can pull all of the bills that are currently being considered. If they are up in committee and you have an interest in them, we strongly encourage you to come, and regardless of whether you support or oppose them, share your views. And for those of you who, like me, prefer to be in rural Colorado than urban Colorado, there is now the option of Zooming in, of doing remote testimony, so you don't have to drive the 2+ hours to Denver, find a parking spot, which takes another hour, and get into the Capitol and all of that. You can do it remotely, and again, the legislative website has all of the information as to how to do that. You can just click on the committees tab, and there's a public testimony options link there. We do encourage you to come and testify, because if you understand how the process works, you realize that often what happens is constituent A will come to legislator A and say, I have this problem and I want you to solve it. And often constituent A will say, this is how I think you should solve it. Sometimes they don't, but often that is what happens. And legislator A will then come to the rest of us and say, I have solved this problem in this particular way. Do you agree with the way that I have solved it? And then really, by and large, because of the speed with which we look at these policies and just the dynamics politically that are in that building, we can only answer one of 2 ways. We either answer yes by clicking the green button or no by clicking the red button. There are very few opportunities, really, especially when the policy is substantive and the bills are lengthy, to do much by way of changing the policy. And so we might agree with our colleagues all over the building, regardless of the aisle, that there's a problem that needs to be solved. We may, however, not agree with the solution that is put forth. And so it's important that constituents come and share their perspectives, because so often whatever constituent A gave by way of solution or legislator A gave by way of solution really discounts, or just not necessarily intentionally discounts, but just by virtue of lacking knowledge, doesn't incorporate all of the different constituencies or influence interests that would be impacted by those bills, which is why we often see the same policy brought before us multiple times in a row, year after year, because as the unintended and intended consequences start to play out in our communities, then people raise their hand and say, this doesn't work for me, and so then we have to fix it. But if we can minimize that by hearing from you all first, and you springboarding for us the opportunity to say, this just isn't the right solution. Let's look further into this. Let's re-examine how to solve this problem. It's very helpful. So that's process, but in terms of substance, what are we seeing substantively? Well, in my first year, when Governor Polis stood before us and gave his State of the State address, he said that his goal and the goal of his majority was to fundamentally transform Colorado. And that has been happening over the last 2 years, and it continues now. Now, many people ask me, how can you fundamentally transform an entire state without many people noticing? And really the way that is done is through narrative, meta-narratives, or existential crises, creating these big problems and saying the only way to solve these problems is to change the whole way that we do life. right? We have to infringe upon your rights in order to solve this big crises. And this year, the big crises, the big meta-narrative is affordable housing. We all know it's an issue. I'm looking for a house. I just am recently married. I'm looking for a place to live, and I'm struggling to find it. I understand that is an issue. But when you use that particular big topic in order to fundamentally transform, this is a dangerous mic for someone who uses her hands a lot. I'll put them behind me. To fundamentally transform whole areas of law, like Senator Baisley pointed to, rent controls. What is that going to do to our market? That's not something that the free market contemplates, and so that is a fundamental transformation. Other major topics that have been brought forth by the Speaker of the House, by the State of the State address this year, that our colleagues in the majority are looking to impact: water, education funding, gun control, mental health, energy, and abortion access. We talked a little bit about that. One that will probably interest all of you, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, is the impact on Tabor. So Tabor is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It's designed to say to the state of Colorado, we are willing to pay you. We understand the value of government and we want to fund you, but we're only going to do it to this much, right? It's like having a teenager and you say, I will give you so much money, but I'm not giving you any more. I'll let you use my credit card, but I'm not allowing you any more than this. If you find yourself in an emergency, young son, young daughter, feel free to call me and I'll give you a little bit more, but otherwise you're stuck to this budget. And that's what Tabor did. It said, you know what, the people, we own the money, we are going to give it to the government this much. If you end up collecting more than we've given you permission for, you have two options. You can either directly send it back to us, and there's a mechanism in law for that to happen, or you have to ask our permission to keep it. Well, unfortunately, over the last 20 years, Tabor's now in its 30th year, right? We just celebrated its 30th year. But over, let's say, the last decade or better, Tabor has been picked at to where it's almost gone, in essence. It's still on the books, but because of things like this last year, this last ballot initiative, if you guys will remember, there was the affordable housing ballot initiative. Well, many people didn't realize that what that does is undermine Tabor, and it removes your refunds in large part. Well, there's going to be another bill that moves forward this year that again will go to the people more than likely this November, that uses education funding as a means to almost completely destroy Tabor. And so we won't have that same check. And to give you an understanding, when Referendum C was passed a few years ago, and that was as a result of the recession, right? And the state of Colorado was fearful that they weren't going to be able to cover their debts, and so there was a pause placed on Tabor. Well, between that time and now, household budgets have increased roughly 2.5%. But the state government's budget, which was supposed to be increased at the same rate as household budgets, has increased over 7%. Well, that fix, that hold, is now starting to catch up to be what it was supposed to be under Tabor initially. And so our colleagues are feeling the constraint. They're not going to be able to grow government to the same degree as they were before, and so they have concerns. What that means is that the budget, the JBC, the budget analysts are saying over the next few years, we should be getting more and more of those $750 refunds, maybe even more than the $750 that you all got in the mail in the fall that came through Tabor. And our colleagues, many of them are saying, we don't want to give that money back to the people, and so we need to find ways to keep it. And so they're doing that by deliberately asking permission, like through what will likely be this education ballot initiative, to be able to spend those dollars elsewhere. They'll do it that way. They'll also do it through tax credits. So every time there's a tax credit, that comes off of the Tabor refund. It doesn't come out of the general fund. It's not one of those things where it's actually hitting the state budget. It's coming out of those Tabor refund dollars. And then one of the interesting things that I've seen in a bill this year, we're supposed to be a single subject state. So we're not supposed to have omnibus bills, right? We're supposed to only have a bill that deals with one single subject. Well, there was a bill that went through the House recently. It was pitched as a veteran cemetery funding bill, and actually there was two parts to it. The first was simply to say these dollars that the state is already collecting for this veteran cemetery, now we're giving the state authority to spend it for that purpose. Okay, great, fine, no problem. But the second part of it was creating a slush fund for the Department of Public Safety to gather gifts, grants, and donations, go out and publicly raise money like they're a nonprofit for whatever programs they want for their general purpose. And that is concerning to me because I believe in the three branches of government. I believe in separation of powers. And when we as the legislature are giving authority to the executive branch in order to raise monies that they can then expend however they want to expend without any legislative oversight, it's concerning to me. And so we're seeing all of these other ways that they're trying to access additional funding. My bills, so it's true right now I have 3 bills posted. I will also have a resolution coming. My first bill is a delineator post bill. So it is changing some CDOT regulations to move those reflective posts that you'll see on highways that are directly across from each other. This is problematic on 2-lane highways in rural communities where you have big combines, big farm equipment, as well as an increased amount of wind turbine, oversized loads, etc. That narrows the road, and so what ends up happening is these drivers either have to hit the posts and run them over, often damaging their equipment, or they have to stop, and then all sorts of traffic gets backed up and it's a hazard. And so my bill just simply asks that CDOT change its standards to where the posts are staggered and to where they're flexible so that if they are run over, then they just push down and come back up. They've done this successfully in Idaho, and so we're hopeful that will get through. The second bill that I have is a study of the family court system. I have a number of constituents in my district, both my old district and my current district, as well as people from around the state who I get emails from regularly pointing to the struggles that they've experienced in the family court system. Some of them go to the point of saying the family courts are corrupt and the processes are corrupt and all it does is keep families in conflict. And so my bill just simply says, let's look into this issue. Let's study this issue. There are so many people raising their hands and saying this is a problem, but it's hard. It's one of those hard areas because it's hard to discern between what is a systemic issue of error that needs to be corrected and what is based in someone just being frustrated that they didn't get as much time with their kids or they have to pay more in child support than they might have thought, right? It's hard to discern that at times. So this bill will hopefully be a comprehensive study. It will hopefully be able to involve everyone, so there'll be a sort of a road trip type of a panel that comes like with a redistricting committee where they come to different districts and invite people to share their stories so we really understand what is going on and how best to fix it. My third bill is in response to last year's decision. Colorado decided to legalize or codify the homicide, the legalization. They legalized homicide for an entire class of people. Colorado said it's okay if you want to kill these people, that's absolutely fine. There will be no ramifications to you. That decision is unlikely to change in the current makeup of the legislature. I find that abhorrent. I do not think that anyone should be murdered without any sort of ramifications to that and actually encouraged. And so my bill simply says that if you are going to legalize homicide, you at least need to make it humane, which means before you kill these people, you at least have to give them a sedative or an anesthetic in order that they not feel the pain that is attendant to that death. My last bill, so to speak, will be an overhaul of the entire system that the General Assembly operates under. So the General Assembly, like I said, we look at over 600 bills a year. These are weighty things. We are impacting people's daily lives. and we just do it at a high rate of speed. We often do it without full context of a situation. And so my bill is designed to add transparency, it's designed to add higher degrees of accountability, and it's designed in order to allow for more voices to be heard. And I don't know how much time I have left, and so I will look to Bob. I can explain it more fully if someone desires, but it is kind of a complex multi-part bill.
I think maybe you're getting into legislative esoteria, and I do have some questions, so I think if somebody would like to talk to you about that, I mean, I'd be fascinated by it since I spent many years up at the Capitol. But I think at this point, I do have some questions. I want to point out one thing, however. You mentioned the legislative website, and I've spent 20 years working the legislature, and it was a pain in the butt to go to that website, because what you do is you go in and you click and you get House bills, and you got to go down and read the whole page after page just to look at titles. They have reorganized that site now, so that if you go to the Colorado General Assembly, you can just click on the button in the subject area you are interested in, and it will take you to the bills in that subject area. By the same token, and just as I did, you can click on your representative, and it will take you to the bills that representative is sponsoring. So I commend the technical folks. I bet they're higher level than the tech guy operating the cameras back there for coming up with it. Not you, John, the other guy behind you. I commend the legislature and the staff of the Capitol for doing that. But boy, does it make our job easier as citizens and as people who are engaged. But I do have a very important question from our tech guy back in the booth, who is of course, as you know, a former senator, held what basically was your seat, Senator Baisley, before the change. Apparently there's a bill, House Bill 1028, to provide for name badges for former legislators. Our tech guy would like to know whether you support or oppose that bill that would give a special identity to people that once served in the citizen legislature as they roam the Capitol. And I'll point out to the folks here, if you're a lobbyist or if you're a business people, most people wear name badges in the Capitol. The question is whether it should be one that says, I'm a former legislator. Either of you have an opinion on that bill?
I voted on that bill, and I voted no. And in large part because I do believe we are to be a citizen legislature. And so I think that creating while I appreciate the service of those who've come before, and I myself would be eligible now to one of those, after we are done with our time, I say that we should be going back to our communities and going back to our normal lives. And so to give those kinds of badges, I think it speaks the opposite to folks. I also am concerned there was an amendment that was put forth in the House to say that former legislators could not wear those name badges while on Capitol grounds while lobbying for particular groups. That amendment was killed, and so the idea that someone could go up and have an undue influence or an increased level of influence simply because they're wearing a former legislator bag is something that I just don't support.
I think you made a former senator happy, Senator Baisley.
Yeah.
What do you think when it comes to you?
Let me pile on also. And yeah, so while I, in effect, okay, thank you. While I effectively have succeeded Kevin Grantham in this seat, not as Senate President. So that's an impressive role that Commissioner Grantham was our Senate President. But I asked 5 questions of every bill, and one of those is, does this rise to the level of state statute? Should this be a law? And while we have there's like a gift site that they present to all the legislators early in the session where you can buy jackets and T-shirts and that sort of thing that have your name on it. That's where this ought to be. If someone wants to order a badge, they actually, if you order one of these, a vest or something, anyone can't order one that says that you're a state senator, state representative. They validate to see if you actually are, and then they'll make it up. That's where I think that ought to happen. It's just not a law thing, so it seems very silly to me. So I'll be a no vote when it makes it over to the Senate.
All right, we've got one happy county commissioner back there. Got a couple of bills that are related. We got a couple of tough ones I'm going to get to, and I want to make sure I get it before Representative Luck has to leave. But let's talk finances first. General question about bills that have unfunded mandates for local governments. And a related one, sort of, is the grocery fee bag. We all pay 10 cents a bag now for, and that money's supposed to be, now the question I've got here says the 6 cents of that goes back to the store, and 4 cents goes to the state. Now, I understand from one of our city council members that the 6 cents is supposed to go to the local government. So do you have any idea where that money's going and how it's being used?
I'm going to answer really slowly that I do not know, to give Stephanie time to look it up. Because she's
Unfortunately, there's no service.
no cell service, so sorry. I guess neither of us really knows the breakdown. Do you? I don't.
I don't remember off the top of my head what that breakdown is, but I can tell you that it was a bill that passed in 2021. Representative Cutter was a sponsor of that bill, and I'm pretty sure both of us voted no.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick note, my wife handed me, said, you know, I refer to myself as a recovering lawyer. Maybe the new name badge could be recovering legislator. Okay, getting into kind of a tough area, and this, I'm going to roll these together just mostly to save time, and I want to make sure that both of you get to answer. We got one question about the FDA allowing retail pharmacies to dispense abortion pills, and the concern about whether school-based health centers might be able to prescribe them. Somewhat related, but not, you know, separate, but still in that sort of area of difficult issues for schools, is the whole issue around the transgender policies and issues. I know the local school board here recently came up with a standard operating procedure regarding that, and I think there's a tough balance between treating people fairly and getting into the whole gender, transgender, you know, these are sort of biological, psychological, social questions. And do you see, where do you see that going in I know it's a tough one, and there's probably not a legislative answer, but what are your thoughts on it?
Okay. Okay, going back to the first set of questions, just in terms of unfunded mandates, again, so you all know, and I'm gonna take a leap here and say that Senator Baisley agrees with me on this. We don't support unfunded mandates, and that happens a lot, right? And it's not just for local governments, but it's also for businesses and families and schools and whatever, and we do see that a lot. We have this great idea, there's no funding for it, so you figure out how to fund it, but you have to do it, and you have to do it right now. We don't think that that is good governance, if I can be so bold as to say that on your behalf. In terms of the abortion pill, I know that there are some lawsuits that are going through other circuit courts or that have been introduced into other circuits. So for instance, in the Fifth Circuit in Texas, there is a question related to the abortion pill and whether, because of the way that it was approved, some issues with its FDA approval, whether that's something that can continue to be on the market. I don't see that as something that is really on the docket for the legislature this year. The one thing, though, that has been raised to me that I find very interesting, and sitting on the Ag Committee, I'm going to be bringing this up when it makes sense. But it seems, though, that the abortion pill is having an impact on our water quality. throughout the nation. And so there's been some reports that because of both the chemical that is used for these abortion pills as well as the human remains that are expunged, that is getting into our water supply, and our current water treatment is insufficient to actually remove those things from the water. And so it is causing problems. Now, I haven't been able to substantiate this with actual studies, that I have read, but this has been raised as an issue to me, and it's being raised by some national groups that I am aware of. And so because we're talking a lot of water and ag this year, I'm going to be asking about the water quality as relates to that. And so that's a state issue that sort of links in. As for the transgender question, the transgender policy that Canyon City School District is considering or has recently passed, I'm sorry, I don't know where that stands. I think they recently passed it. Is that true?
They renamed it standard operating procedure.
Okay. I see. Okay, so that policy, whatever the form it's taking, is likely in response to a bill that was run in 2021 by Representative Esgar that added 2 classes of people to our Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. The 2 classes of people are the categories are gender expression and gender identity. And so basically now under state law, no one can discriminate on the grounds of gender identity and gender expression. And we had a thorough debate about this. We pointed to recent case law that said that this is not constitutional, that we can't do this for a variety of reasons. And so you understand just a hypothetical outside of the schools. If you hired an individual who presented as a biological male and was a biological male and presented as male. And then you hired them on day 1. On day 3, they came in presenting as a female. They're still biological male, but they present as a female. And then on day 4, they decide that they're going to present as stealth gender, and then the next day a different gender. There are upwards of 200 genders now in the definition, right? And under this bill, you couldn't say anything. You couldn't say, hey, we have a dress code that requires you to present this way. You couldn't say they can only use certain facilities. You have to make available all sorts of things to them based off of how they desire to express their gender, and that gender can be expressed in varying forms, in varying days, right? There's and if you talk to people who have embraced gender theory, they will talk to you about how gender is fluid and it can be moved in and out of. And so there are a lot of issues that then poses to businesses, to schools, to individuals of all types. And I think what we're going to see is, because the legislature refused to deal with these issues when we were debating it, they wanted to not touch on this and try to figure out how does it work when you have 2 protected classes, when you have the protected class of religion coming up against the protected class of gender expression. How does that conflict get resolved? There was no desire to work those things out in the legislature, and so unfortunately that means that more than likely it will have to be worked out in the courts, and we're going to have to do it piecemeal, and it then puts communities in places like Canyon is right now, where there's a lot of conflict and a lot of uncertainty about the best way forward. With that, I have to go to Pueblo. I'm so sorry, but it's great seeing you all, and I hope to see you in March.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Locke, and of course, we'll be back down here next month. We'll give you another chance at it. That puts you on the hot seat, Senator Beasley. And quick answer to I just got it's official on this green piece of paper. 4 cents of the bag fee goes to or just 6 cents goes to the local government for administration, and 4 cents goes to the state. Okay. So now our council members, to the store, excuse me, the store, excuse me, I said that wrong, read it wrong. Now we have a city council member wonders when he's going to get his money, but that's probably beyond your pale there. Do you want to take up the topic she just finished?
Sure. Let me just, first of all, I can't help but think of Jeff Foxworthy routine, in response to all of this. He addresses things a lot better and with a lot greater humor than I would. But, I'm reminded through just this consideration how obsessed the Democrat Party is with sex and race. these things come in, and it's odd, and it's language you don't hear in Canyon City. You don't hear this in everyday talk. You hear all kinds of things. I got called, along with several of us yesterday, an ableist yesterday. Anybody know what that is? So I just got one head shaking. So we were considering in a committee a bill regarding how the all the state's websites are presented, especially for disabled folk. If you are sight impaired or hearing impaired, especially, but just the way everything's organized, there's new standards and so on for how government websites, public facing, ought to look. So this is our first state legislator in a wheelchair, and God bless him, he's a veteran who was injured in a helicopter crash. So we appreciate his service for all of that. But he calls the rest of us who are able-bodied as ableists, and we have ableist attitudes about access, and he's yelling at all of us. And that's it's an odd kind of a thing. But so let me just wrap it all up by saying I think this reflects two big mistakes that we have made as a society. One is that we allowed our government to define marriage. We allowed our government to license the religious institution of marriage. What could be more of a church and state violation than that? So when you allow the state to license the religious institution of marriage, then they will tend to redefine it. And so that's one. And also, I've contended a long time, and I'll probably get in trouble for it eventually, but I haven't so far. I don't believe that we ever should have turned over education to the government as well. So what happens? So all of these issues that are being dealt with in some woke fashion would not be dealt with in that same fashion if we raised up our kids in education, or we engaged our church or private school to do that for us. But when we turn it over to the government, this is the kind of stuff that we get. So
I'm going to ask a personal follow-up on that, because there's been a lot of discussion in education funding. I mean, part of the reason is because the state and local governments are the ones that have the ability to gather the resources to distribute it. A lot of discussion about having the money follow the kids instead of going to the schools. Any discussion about that in the Capitol, where you say, okay, here's your, they kind of did it with colleges in a way, with the, but having, here's your allowance, go spend it where you want to, type of approach?
it certainly gets brought up by our side of the aisle. Their side of the aisle doesn't care for that a whole lot, but as there's the general funding happens is, in case everyone doesn't realize, we all tax ourselves through property tax primarily, and all that money from across the state gets, from all 64 counties, gets handed to the state for then redistribution back out to the 178 school districts, public school districts in the state, and according to how what is the means of each of those school districts. So Cherry Creek in the Denver Tech Center area is going to get less money than, I don't know, Yuma County will get per students and so on. So it's that per pupil revenue that gets sent back out. But yeah, why does it go to the school district per pupil that gets registered? Why doesn't it follow that student? That's loosening up really on a national level, which I appreciate the recent Supreme Court rulings that could move towards that. So it's the Blaine Amendment that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, that was really intended to discriminate against Catholic schools decades ago. But that's been kicked out of place by the Supreme Court in the last year or two. So I think it opens up the possibility that even public school funding can go to a private school and even a private religious institution.
I've got just a couple more. Again, this is one regarding property tax exemptions. You addressed that earlier, but there is in law a senior property tax exemption, and there now have been passed some other property tax exemptions. The senior exemption requires that the senior own their home for 10 years before they qualify. Some of the other exemptions do not require any length of time of ownership. do you see any potential to address what appears to be a disparity to me?
You know, Bob, I'm gonna have to look into that one. I'm afraid I'll have to plead ignorance. I'm familiar with the having to own your property for 10 years at least, and senior to get that I think is exemption on the first $200,000 worth. But I'm not familiar with these other cases here. I'll have to follow up on that.
Well, the one was it passed last year as an initiative measure, so I'm not surprised. I do have a question, and it's not entirely clear, but I think part of this is raised by, as I understand, there's a bill introduced regarding the use of handcuffs. Are you familiar with that legislation?
I'm not. I'm sure Stephanie is. I'm not. No,
She must, yes, she must. I think it limits the use of handcuffs in
Is that
certain
right? Well,
situations.
okay, I would not be surprised. They're putting a lot of limits on law enforcement these days, so, but I'm not familiar with that one, no, sorry.
Okay, well, that is a question, maybe next month we can,
Okay, sure.
we can talk about that one?
You bet.
This is in
You bet.
reference to the handcuffs.
Okay. I've been handed a thing from the Department of Corrections, and it is, what I'm going to suggest is that perhaps we can look at this later, because if you're not familiar with it, this is not the time to try to get you up to speed. And I appreciate your concern, sir, but I think something you might, I think it'll be coming your way
Is that something
probably.
I can have, that paperwork?
Yeah.
Is that- Yeah.
Those are regulations from Department of Corrections. The spokeswoman or the congresswoman from Boulder introduced a law that Department of Corrections cannot use steel handcuffs on four-point restraints.
So this is a federal law then being introduced, okay.
That's not to do with the federal. What I've got there on like they gave you is the policies
Okay,
that she didn't investigate.
all right.
There's forms there that justifies what they're doing. My concern is, these guys are in a mental health crisis. You can't deal with them, and sometimes you do have to use restraints, but when they do it, it's very restricted, and the information that she got out to the newspaper is not correct.
What a surprise on that one, right?
Present that to you, so when it gets to the Senate, you have some research on it.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I'll give this to you, Senator. Any closing statements you'd like to make? I think we just about, we're right there at the end of our time, so.
Sure. Well, you know, I'm thinking we can readily get discouraged when we look at the numbers. We're one seat away from the Democrats having, and I'm talking very partisan and making assumptions for the crowd, so I apologize for that, but we're one seat away from the majority party having a supermajority to where they could even override a veto from the governor. Not quite. So there are only 12 out of 35 in the Senate that are Republicans, and I believe it's 19 out of 65 in the House. So in the House, there's a supermajority, 2/3 control there, missing it by one seat in the Senate. And so it's quite a mountain to climb. And if you look at, I believe like 15 years ago, it was the reverse was all true. Party I represent, Republican Party, had the majority in the House and the Senate, the governor's office, all the statewide seats of the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the Treasurer, and even both U.S. senators. So quite a change that's happened in this state over the past several years. We could get complacent, we could get discouraged, and here's why I think we always have hope, and why we always ought to continue to strive for the ideal that is the United States of America. And that's because this is not a battle between our side and the other side. This is not the Broncos versus the Raiders, or our colors versus theirs, who cheers better. This is natural law as our nation was founded. If you look at our founding document, we were founded on the basis of what they call the laws of nature and of nature's God. It's right, the beginning statement of the Declaration of Independence, our founding document. We pursue the laws of nature and of nature's God, and the other side pursues rebellion against that But I think we keep our eyes on that prize. It's always worth the battle, and eventually I think we will come out ahead. It may take a generation for us to win this state back. I'm not sure. But I will always be hopeful. I think the battle is always worth it, and we never, never relent. We always strive towards that ideal. America's an incredibly special place, and let's go preserve it. So.
Well, I want to thank you, Senator, for coming, and to Senator Luck as well, even though she's left. We will do this again next month, March 4th, same location. By then, a lot of things will have happened. Hopefully, you can slow down the damage, if not. Yeah, but who is it? Somebody's once said, nothing's safe while the legislature's in session, right? But thank you so much for coming and for representing us so well up at the state capitol.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.